Evan Mazza here, back for another edition of Mazza on Ravens 2025 season preview edition. Almost got the numbers tangled up there. But anyway, welcome to Mazza on Ravens. I'm your host, Evan Mazza here. We are doing a 2025 season preview edition. And actually, this will be a bonus video because not only are we doing a Mazza on Ravens 2025 season preview, as soon as we're done with this, we're going right to the Jets 2025 season preview. So we're starting off with the Ravens today. Obviously, they've just completed a 3-0 preseason, and they're getting ready this week to play the Buffalo Bills. Friday, we'll talk about the Bills game. So this is how we're gonna. Well, this is how we'll do this here. So tonight we're doing these season previews for each of the Ravens and the Jets. I'll give you my personal prediction. Give you my prediction for how each team will do this season and their records and where they finish. I think, and then on Friday we will preview the games, their upcoming games for the week, and then on Monday we will, or whatever the next day later for their games, whether it's Monday, etc. Mostly, of course, it'll be Monday. We will recap the previous week's game. So that's how we'll do it. Friday will be a game preview. Monday will be a game recap. So, or the day after, a game recap. But we'll start today with the 2025 season preview edition of the Baltimore Ravens. And look, as we know, the Ravens really have one expectation. That's going to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl. That's pretty much it. It's very simple with the Ravens this year. It's about finally overcoming the hurdle. It's about finally climbing the mountain. It's about finally getting to the mountaintop and getting a Super Bowl championship in this current era of Ravens football, the Lamar Jackson era, Jackson Harbaugh era, whatever you want to call it. So this feels like the season. Now, we've said this before. We said this in 2019. We said this in 2023. We said this last year that like it felt like the year, right? It felt like the season, right? 2021 and 2022 became kind of lost years because Jackson was hurt down the second half of the season, even and then 2020, obviously they made a run at when they were 6-5 and made the playoffs. 2018, of course, they made a run towards the in the stretch down the stretch and made the playoffs. But it's those three seasons that you thought those were the years, especially last year too, where you thought they would win the Super Bowl or go to the Super Bowl at the very least, but they came up short. And really, it's the same things. It's been the same things for the Ravens since 2018 in the playoffs, where they just it's not like they're not outplaying their opponent, like their opponent is beating them. It's just, oh, their opponent is beating them, yes, but it's just they do beat themselves, whether it's turnovers or penalties, etc. You know, chemistry, etc. They're not. They seem to just they seem to just punch themselves in the face and hurt themselves in January football, and you see it sometimes during the regular season, right? They have games in the regular season that they lose, and you know, and you go, oh, okay, you can't do that in January, and then they play like that in January. So obviously for the Ravens last year, they had another really good season. They were able to win the division again, and they'll be the favorites again to win the AFC North. And they won a playoff game against the Steelers. The second time in franchise history they beat the Steelers in a playoff game. First time at home because the previous other Ravens Steelers playoff games were in Pittsburgh, the previous four. But the fifth one last year was in Baltimore. They beat them, and then they went to Buffalo last year, and they fell behind. In the first half, Lamar had the interception. He had the fumble when they fell behind 10 in the first half, and then of course as they were mounting the comeback in the second half, Andrews had his fumble in the fourth quarter. They had the 2-point conversions that he dropped. So again, you know, it's just those mistakes that was that you can't be down by 10 in Buffalo. You can't be, in that trying to come back in the second half in a tough environment in the playoffs. You have to play 60 minutes. You have to play 60 minutes of football in the playoffs. It's just how it is. And the Ravens have to get back to that this January and February and play 60 good minutes of football. So that's how it has to be. I'm not saying the regular season doesn't matter for the Ravens, but they have reached a kind of the thing with this current era and this current team where, it's about January, it's about February. It's not about September to December. We know how good the Ravens are September to December. It's about even when they have those games where they lose, it's about it's about what happens in January, February. I'll go, but it's this team has to play a good 60 minutes of football, and it starts week one at Buffalo. The journey begins for this team in the same place where the journey came to a halt last year. You know, in Buffalo, and they have to go back in January. They have to go back on Sunday night against the Bills at Buffalo in the final season, the home opener of the final season at that stadium because they'll be moving to the new stadium next year. So there'll be a lot of emotions in this game with the Bills being their last home opener at this ballpark at their stadium. The Ravens coming back to the same place they really should have won last year at. They feel like they let that game get away from them. So it's going to be interesting. But we'll preview more of that game on Friday. But today again, this is where the journey begins for the Ravens. It begins with them on Sunday in Buffalo, and they got to play. Uh, you know, as Ray Lewis would say, 60 minutes. You have to play 60 minutes of good football from here on out, and especially in January and in February. You know, you have to play 60 minutes, and that's where it begins. This journey begins for the team. And there's no excuses. Look, there is no excuses for the Ravens this year. And there was no excuse for them last year. There was no excuse for them in 2023. There was no excuse for them in 2019. You know, but there's definitely no excuses here because by all intents and purposes, the Baltimore Ravens come into this season with the best roster in all of football. A top five head coach, top three head coach, a top five to top three quarterback, the best running back in football, arguably, or if that number two, whatever, a pretty good duo at tight end with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, a good offensive line, a very good receiving core with Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, and now DeAndre Hopkins is here, and even a Tez Walker. You have a new kicker in Tyler Loop, who you're hoping to get more out of because Tucker last year struggled. Now Tyler Loop is here, so you're hoping to get more out of the kicker position this year. Defensively, you added Jari Alexander, you drafted Mike Green, you drafted Malachi Starks. So this is a team with you have Roquan Smith, you paid Kyle Hamilton, you have Odafe Owe, you have Kyle Van Noy, you have Nnamdi Madubuike, you brought back Brent Urban, you have Marlon Humphrey back. You got Nate Wiggins in year two. This is by all intents and purposes, as I just said, the most talented roster in all of football. I think I just mentioned before. They brought in Jari Alexander. So there is this time has to be the year, right? They should have won it last year. Didn't. They especially should have won it in 2019 when they had home field advantage. Didn't have, they lost to Tennessee. Especially should have won in the Super Bowl in 2023 when they had home field advantage and everyone was there. From Ray Lewis to Ed Reed to Jonathan Hogden to Michael Phelps. I think Cal Ripken was there the week before. Everybody was there. Terrell Suggs, everybody was there. I think Anquan Bolden was even there. Everybody's there for that. Everybody was there for that first AFC Championship game at M&T Bank Stadium 2 years ago against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they lost that game. So but now here we are again, once again, with high expectations. And there's no excuse. This has to be the year. This is now year 8 with Jackson and John Harbaugh together. So, I'm not saying that they're not going to get, any more opportunities. Of course, Jackson is still in his prime and he's, still not even 30 yet. But the longer you don't win a Super Bowl, obviously that's when you start to wonder again, will they ever really win a Super Bowl? Will they win it here with him at quarterback and Harbaugh at head coach together? Harbaugh's got a Super Bowl, but it wasn't with Jackson. So, and it's been 13 or so years since Harbaugh last held that world title. 12 years since the last time Harbaugh won the Super Bowl. And we've seen with head coaches before with Sean Payton and Mike McCarthy. You win a Super Bowl, but then you have that talented generational quarterback, and all of a sudden, people start to take notice and go, "Hey, how are you not winning a Super Bowl or more than one Super Bowl with this guy?" McCarthy and Payton, they won more. They won a Super Bowl with Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, but as the years went on, especially with Mike McCarthy, people start to wonder, wait a minute, how are you not winning another Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback? How are you not winning another Super Bowl with Drew Brees at quarterback? Harbaugh hasn't won one at all with Jackson. He won it, so he won it with Flacco. He hasn't won one at all with Jackson. And Jackson's a two-time MVP. Aaron Rodgers won 4 MVPs. Drew Brees is an MVP candidate virtually every season. So, it's the pressure is starting to mount on Harbaugh, I think, not just around Baltimore, but nationally as a whole, for him to get that Super Bowl with this talented generational quarterback in Jackson. So, pressure's on Jackson as well. He's got to play better in the postseason, but there's a lot of pressure too on Harbaugh. There's a lot of pressure on everybody. It's from Lamar to Harbaugh to the front office to everybody else on the roster. There's pressure everywhere for this team to bring home a title. So this and I'm seeing a lot of predictions from a lot of news outlets like Sports Illustrated, NFL.com, and ESPN. So many of them are picking the Ravens to not just go to the Super Bowl but win the Super Bowl. So for this has to be the year. You know, Here we go, year 8. So um, a lot of people throw the Lamar Jackson, Peyton Manning comparisons. Well, Peyton Manning, I believe, was in his 8th season. Let's 2006. He was in his excuse me. He was in his ninth season. He was in his ninth season when he won the Super Bowl in 2006. Lamar is now entering year 8. So this has to be the year for the Ravens to win it all. So we'll see what happens. But for them, it's about the regular season, but it's about the postseason. It's about January. It's about February. So they have to, and if they don't win the Super Bowl this year, there's there's going to be some changes, I think. Whether it's on the obviously Lamar is going to stay put, but in terms of the roster, maybe even coaching, there'll be some changes if the Ravens aren't hoisting a Lombardi Trophy this year, or at least in the Super Bowl. So that's kind of my purse. This is kind of my feel for the Ravens this year coming in, what I think about the Ravens this year, what I think many people believe about the Ravens this year. We're going to do now my 4 keys for the Ravens' success this year. 4 keys this year. Number one's the guards. The Ravens have a good offensive line. You might be wondering, well, wait a minute, whoa, didn't you just say the Ravens have a good offensive line? They do have a good offensive line, but there is some question marks at the guard positions. You have Andrew Voorhees and you have Daniel Falale. They're pretty set at center with Tyler Linderbaum. They're set at the tackles of Rosengarten and re-signing Ryan Stanley. I should also add the health of Ryan Stanley. Ryan Stanley, he just needs to continue to stay healthy. That's all. But it's the 2 guard positions. It's Voorhees and Falale. Can they hold their own throughout this season and protect Jackson and protect the interior of the line? So that's going to be interesting. That will be a key for this team. That'll be interesting to watch as the season goes on. Can Falale, especially Falale and Voorhees, play well as the season goes on? Key number 2 is the secondary. So new second again, Malachi Starks drafted. There's a lot of hype around him, but he's still a rookie. And they signed Jari Alexander. Now, Jari Alexander, he returned to the practice field today, but he's been hampered with an injury over the past couple of weeks. He returned to the practice field today on Wednesday, but he's been the guy who's been injured. And, you know, he just had a recent injury just now that had him miss a few weeks of practice. But you factor in Jari Alexander if he can stay healthy. Malachi Starks is a rookie. And, can Marlon Humphrey continue? Can Nate Wiggins take a year 2 step? And can Marlon Humphrey continue his good play from last year? Marlon Humphrey kind of had a return. Marlon Humphrey had a return to form season last year. It'd been a couple of years since Marlon Humphrey had played like that. He had struggles. He had some injuries. And coming into last year, there was some questions about whether Humphrey would be a Raven in the foreseeable future. And here he is back again because he had a very good season last year, led the team in interceptions. So can Humphrey continue off his strong year last year? So that's going to be, and their chemistry will be interesting together. This secondary has all the potential to be the best secondary in all of football. Look at it. It's fantastic on paper. But if they can stay healthy, but again, you have Alexander, and can he stay healthy? You have Humphrey. Can he continue to have a good season? Nate Wiggins entering his sophomore year. Malachi Starks is a rookie. I think Kyle Hamilton, I said on the last show, I think Kyle Hamilton, though, is going to have a very big season. And I think he's going to have a defensive player of the year kind of season, defensive player of the year caliber season. So I think Hamilton's in for a very big season. I think he's going to be in for a defensive player of the year season. So, or that caliber season. But that's going to be interesting. How will their secondary mesh together? And can the defense overall start the season off strong? Because last year it didn't start off strong in year 1 under Zach Rior, but now with Zach Rior with another full off season, getting to know the guys, I expect them to get off to a quicker start than they did last year. Key number three, the pass rush, which leads me to the pass rush. Mike Green, Kyle Van Noy, Odafe Owe. There's some other pieces there, like David Ojabo, but those are the three main guys. Kyle Van Noy, Odafe Owe, who's entering a contract season, and Mike Green. Can the rookie live up to the hype? You know, can Odafe Owe have a big season as he has a contract year? And can Kyle Van Noy continue to play at the pace he's playing at? Kyle Van Noy, the Ravens have gotten a lot out of him over the last 2 years, more than I think even they thought, or certainly many others thought. He's a darn good player, but I don't think many people thought after they got him in week 4 of the 2023 season that he would have double-digit sacks in back-to-back years, especially when they signed him in week 4 of the 2023 season. You know, can he continue that pace? Like it's pretty remarkable what he's done the last 2 years, but can he continue that coming into next season? So that's another key. And again, you got to get after the quarterback. You're in a conference with Pat Mahomes, a division with Joe Burrow, a conference with Josh Allen. You're going to face Allen on Sunday. So you got to get after the quarterback. And key number 4, Tyler Loop. Tyler Loop is taking over for kicker after the Ravens arguably had the best kicker of all time as their guy for 13 or so years. Because of his off the field issues, he's now gone. And Tyler Loop, the sixth round, the first Ravens kicker ever drafted, is now takes over, and he's now the new kicker. It's a big shoes to fill. It's a lot to ask, but they're going to need Tyler Loop as a rookie to have a big season. If they're in the same way Tucker did in 2012 as an undrafted free agent rookie, they're going to need Tyler Loop to not say being Tucker, but not saying being Tucker or anything. Obviously, that's a lot to ask, but just be pretty darn good, and be better than Tucker was in 2024 because Tucker had his struggles last year. So, and even at times in 23. So he struggled a lot last year. So be better than what Tucker gave them last year. But again, it's a tall order, but Loop has to play well. So, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on the kicker position, I think, for the Ravens this year. There'll be a lot of eyes on Loop, I think, this year. So those are my 4 keys for the Ravens' success coming. I know there's other things. DeAndre Hopkins, can he at least be that goal line, first down receiver, and Lamar can throw it up and he can go up and catch the ball. I'm not prime DeAndre Hopkins, you're not going to get, but what else is new? The Ravens getting receiver that's not in their prime, and you just got to get whatever you get, right? It's, go through all the list of Ravens receivers that they've signed that were past their primes. It's a long list. But can they at least get Hopkins to be good catching the ball for first downs, catching the ball in the goal line, etc.? If he can do that, he adds a lot. Can Rashad Bateman continue his second, after having a big breakout year last year? Well, things weren't going well for Bateman the first 3 years, but then he emerged last year. So and he got a nice contract extension. Can he continue that into the season? Can Derrick Henry continue to keep running the way he's running? I think Derrick Henry is going to have a big season, but there's always that, maybe this is the year he slows down. I don't know. You never, but I think Henry is Derrick Henry. I think he's going to keep on being Derrick Henry, because he's just, like I said in the last show, he's just an athletic machine. He's amazing. He really is. So there's a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot of keys, but I think those are the 4 main keys for the Ravens this year as they enter their, hopefully what would be a big season for them. Which brings me to the schedule. We're going to go through the schedule for the games for the Ravens and later on for the Jets. And we'll go through I'm not going to necessarily do wins and losses, but we'll go through the schedule and give you guys my opinion on what I think, those games could be. Obviously week 1, Ravens at the Bills, in Buffalo. Look, I think that game could go either way, but we'll preview that game more on Friday. The Ravens play the Browns in their home opener. After that, week 2, week 3, they're home against the Lions on Monday Night Football. Then they're at Kansas City, followed by home against the Texans, home against the Rams, home against the Bears. 3 straight home games for the Ravens from October 5th to October 26th. They have a bye week, of course, in the middle of this. Um, but three straight home games, followed by three straight road games at the Dolphins, at the Vikings, at the Browns. Then they're back home against the Jets, home against the Bengals, home against the Steelers. So another three straight home games, followed by more three straight road games with the Bengals, two road games out of three with the Bengals, the Patriots at home, and then the Packers on the road, and then their week seven, and then they finish out the season at Pittsburgh. Um, I've gone through the schedule a couple of times. I think the Ravens. I think you're looking at least a 12-5, maybe a 13-4 kind of schedule. Uh, and I think again, you like to pick out some games where you go, where are those games, right? Where the Ravens might kind of have that kind of loss, right? That kind of game where it's like, you know, take last year against Gardner Minshew and the Raiders, or 2 years ago against Gardner Minshew and the Colts, or last year with Jameis Winston and the Browns, right? Where's that kind of game, right? Because they seem to have those kind of like that. They seem to have like one game or two, maybe even three every single season. And I look at the schedule and I look at those three straight games on the road, like all three games on the road at Miami, at Minnesota, at Cleveland. They'll be favorites in all three of those games, maybe even big favorites in all three of those games. But, you know, Miami Vikings have a good defense. I remember a couple of years ago the Ravens lost. I mean, the Ravens have lost to the Dolphins a couple of times over the last couple of years. They lost to them in a great game in 2022. They lost them in 2021. They did beat them in 2023. Um, Minnesota's got a good defense. Cleveland is division, so I could see a loss around or loss two around here. I could see a loss around those. Plus, it's also three straight road games. Three straight road games is incredibly tough. Um, that I could see a game where the Ravens just don't play to their best around this, in that stretch. Um, and then you got I mean they get division. They get the Bengals and Steelers. They're two biggest competitors for the division in the last several weeks of the season. Beginning November 27th, Thanksgiving, the Ravens will play the Bengals twice and the Steelers twice. They'll play the Bengals Thanksgiving night, then they play the Steelers after that on December 7th. Then they play the Bengals again December 14th, and then a few weeks later, in the last week of the season, they play the Steelers again. So, so like that's the schedule makers pretty much lined it up for the AFC North, right? The schedule makers said, well, these are the three teams in the AFC North that are going to compete for this division. So we're going to pair them up the last several weeks and make this, for the division. So I guess it's smart if you're the NFL schedule makers. It's smart, but that's tough though for the Ravens. It's tough for all three of them, but but for the Ravens, it's still pretty tough. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. But again, you could see also games where you think the Ravens also have a couple of games where they just look like the most complete team in the NFL. Take the Detroit Lions game 2 years ago. Remember that one where they just looked like the most complete team in the league? Ironically, actually, the Ravens play the Lions again. Uh, uh, where is that one? That's home against the Lions on Monday Night Football, September 22nd. Um, I kind of go through that schedule. Like, what's the game? Like, what's that one game where they can look at the most complete team of football? I think it could be either the Rams game. Oh, I'm sorry, no, not the Rams game, the Bears game. I think the Bears game could be that game. Again, I'm not saying the Ravens will have a lot of really good games this year. The Ravens will have a lot of really good games this year. I mean like that one game where they look like the best team in the league, right? The most complete best team in the league, right? Like remember too, like I said, a couple of years ago, they had the Lions game, the 49ers game on Monday Night Football, the Dolphins game. Um, I would even say last year against the Steelers in the two games that they won. Well, no, you know what? The playoff game. In the playoff game that they beat the Steelers in, they looked like the best team in football. And I would even say, and you know what? Yeah, I'll say too. Yeah. In the regular season game, in both of those games that they beat the Steelers in last year, they looked like the best team in the league. They looked so good in those games, especially in the wild card playoff game. So you like to, so you kind of need so you like to see any games that the Ravens have that you go, okay, that might be a game with it, but this might be a game where they look great. So, but I think the Ravens again will look really, really good in a lot of games this year. They're going to win a lot of regular season games this year, which is why I think they will go 12-5, maybe 13-4. I'll say 12-5. You know what? I'll say 13-4. I'll say I'll say 13-4. I think they'll go 13-4. I think they'll get the number one seed in the AFC. And I think they'll be in the AFC Championship game this year. What they do with that, I don't know. Because you gotta beat Kansas City. You gotta beat Buffalo. These are the two teams that they've had trouble beating, right? The Buffalo Bills, they beat up last year in the regular season, but then they lost in the postseason to them for a second time in the last couple of years. Kansas City, they're 1-5 against them since 2018. They'll play them again this year at Kansas City. I think the Ravens will be good enough to win 12 to 13 games. I think they'll win the division. In terms of how they do, I think they'll I think you know I think they'll win the division. I think they'll have the one seed. I think they'll win 12 to 13 games. And I think they'll be in the AFC Championship game this year. Can you beat the Chiefs? Because I think they will be Ravens Chiefs again in the AFC Championship game, just like it was 2 years ago. I think that's where I think because I think Kansas City is going to be a lot better than people say. There's a lot of people that not down on Kansas City, but feel like there's going to be a bit of a, you know, kind of a year where they're like, oh yeah, they're good, but not a Super Bowl contender. You're right, because a lot of people are saying Ravens, Bills, Ravens, Bills, Ravens, Bills, Ravens, Bills. Right? That seems to be the consensus pick. But Kansas City is still Kansas City. I think there's going to be a lot of motivation for them to get back to the Super Bowl after they lost the Eagles last year. You know, I think it's going to be Ravens Chiefs in the AFC Championship game in Baltimore. And I think if the Ravens want to win the Super Bowl, if they want to get there, you're going to have to beat the Chiefs. You're going to have to beat them. And hey, you know what? Joe Flacco beat Tom Brady to get his Super Bowl. Best quarterback of his generation, right? Best quarterback ever. Pat Mahomes is the best quarterback of his generation and one of the best quarterbacks of all time, top five, top whatever. Lamar Jackson beats him to get to his Super Bowl. So, but I think the Ravens will get the one seed. They will have a 13-4 record. And I think they'll win the division title again for the first time ever since division realignment. A team will win the division in 2002. A team will win the AFC North for 3 straight years in a row. No other team has done that. So I think the Ravens will be the first team since the division realignment into the AFC North, from the AFC Central to the AFC North. I think they'll be the first team to win 3 straight division titles. And I think they'll be in the AFC Championship game again. I think they'll get the one seed. I think they'll be in the AFC Championship game again, hosting it in Baltimore. And I think they'll host it against the Chiefs. Can you beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game? We'll see. Let's see. But so that's my 25th. That's my 2025 Baltimore Ravens preview. That is where I think the Ravens will be that's where I think the Ravens. That's how I think the Ravens will do in the 2025 season. I think this team will be really good. I think this team can win the Super Bowl and hoist the Lombardi Trophy. They just got to play it. They just got to go out there and play. Don't, it's all about the Ravens just got to go out and play. Just go and play. Go play your game. No turnovers. Come January football, come the playoffs, no turnovers, no penalties. Be good on offense. Run the football. Lamar, be careful. Lamar, don't turn the ball over. Offense, don't get stuffed up. Be one of the best offenses in football. Defense, no penalties. Offense, no penalties too, but defense, no penalties. Defense has been really good in the playoffs overall. They have been. But they haven't been able to get turnovers. That's kind of the weird thing with the Ravens defense in the playoffs. They've still been really good. And given the Ravens an opportunity to win games in the playoffs, and given their offense an opportunity to win games in the playoffs, they just haven't been able to get turnovers, which is very weird, very strange for a Ravens defense, especially in the playoffs. So get turnovers in the playoffs. They've been really good. You just got to get turnovers. So and John Harbaugh, hey man, hey man, this is arguably your most talented roster you've had ever in your 18 years as head coach. You know, I love Harbaugh, but dude, you got to get your second title here. And if you get, and not to say John Harbaugh isn't already a Hall of Fame head coach, and he probably is, but you get your second Super Bowl championship, you got a automatic trip to Canton, Ohio, and you'll be a Hall of Famer. So, and if Lamar Jackson wins the Super Bowl, you got an automatic trip to Canton, Ohio. You can probably already say he already is a Hall of Fame with two MVPs, but if he gets a Super Bowl MVP, and he hoists Lombardi, he can retire tomorrow and he's a Hall of Famer, automatic Hall of Famer, same as John Harbaugh. So, but I think I said at the beginning of the show or at the beginning of this portion of the segment with previewing the Ravens, there's a lot of pressure on Jackson, but there is a lot of pressure on John Harbaugh. So that's why I think the Ravens. So we'll see how it goes. Should be an exciting season for the Ravens. Should be a fun season for the Ravens, but it should also be very, very, very pressured. It should be very, very, very a lot of pressure on them. A lot is on them this year, and they've got to be in the Super Bowl this year. They've got to win the Super Bowl. So see how they do. That was my prediction for the Ravens for the 2025 season. We will see you on Friday for Mazza on Ravens. Now, time for Ravens on Jets in three, two, one. And we're back. Welcome to an episode of Mazza on Jets. It is for 2025 New York Jets season preview. And I guess we already should talk about a quick breaking news that came out today. Obviously, we'll talk about the Jets 2025 season. We'll talk about what I think this season is about for them, and we'll go through their schedule and everything like that. But we do got to talk about a big breaking news that came out of Florham Park today. Elijah Vera Tucker, boy, this poor guy, this poor dude just continues to get bit with injuries. He's incredibly talented. He's a stud on the offensive line at the guard position, and he's hurt again. According to Adam Schefter earlier today on Wednesday, he suffered a biceps tendon, a torn biceps tendon, and he's getting a second opinion. Let me pop up Adam Schefter's report here that came out earlier today. He suffered a season-ending torn tricep. Excuse me, I think I said bicep. A torn tricep. He's getting a second opinion to confirm the injury and see if surgery is necessary. Obviously, this is a big blow. The Jets fear that this is a season-ending injury. This is such a big blow. And you're coming into the season with a semblance of expectations of where this team could be and how this young offensive line could mold, right? Because this Jets team, on paper before this injury, looked to have a really, really nice offensive line and a really, really nice young offensive line, that you could build around for a while. And once again, the injury bug hits them, and it's with Elijah Vera Tucker again. And it stinks. It's a big blow to this offensive line. And the offensive line was one of the things that I was looking forward to with the Jets. This was one of the things I was really looking forward to watch with the Jets this season. And now one of their key players is maybe out for the rest of the season. So, and that's a big blow. And you feel for him. You feel for him because he's a talented player. He's kind of like with the Mets. He's kind of like Francisco Alvarez, right? It's incredibly talented player that just continues to get bit with injuries. It stinks. So, but the Jets lose Elijah Vera Tucker for the entire season, depending on how that second opinion goes. But that's a big blow to the offensive line position. So, to talk about the 2025 Jets season, look, I think for this season and what to expect, just be a competitive football team. That's all I ask. And I know many Jet fans probably disagree. They want the Jets to make the playoffs for the first time in 14 years. And I get it. Like, I understand it. You don't want to miss the playoffs for 14 consecutive years. It's just, especially a team here in New York with the Jets. This team needs to be good. This team, you want to see this team be good. You want to see this team be a competitor, be a contender. But I just think there is going to be, this you got a new head coach, new GM with a group of players who have not won. The Jets have not had a winning record since 2000. Forget the 14 consecutive years for a second. I'm missing the playoffs. The Jets haven't had a winning season since 2015 when they were 10-6. So it's been 10 years since the last time the Jets had a winning season. So it's really about, can this Jets team start competing? Can the Jets be watchable on Sundays? And can Aaron Glenn get them to be, you know, build an identity, build a culture, build a foundation, build some pieces to the puzzle, get some players, to start playing to their potential, right? Because like I said, everybody on this Jets roster has not experienced winning. Quinn Williams has lost a lot. Sauce Gardner has lost a lot. Garrett Wilson has lost a lot. Brees Hall has lost a lot. Their offensive line, guys in their offensive line have lost a lot. You know, a lot of these guys in this roster have lost a lot of football games, so they're not used to winning. And Aaron Glenn is a guy who loves to win, is used to winning. He won games with the Jets as a player. As a coordinator with the Lions, he was winning a lot of football games. This is a guy who will not tolerate losing. This is also a guy that won't tolerate lack of effort, bad penalties, all that stuff. He's already shown that in training camp. He showed that in the preseason. Like he's gonna, if this whether this team wins or loses games, he's gonna have this team prepared and playing football and being competitive. And I think that's the key thing for the Jets: be competitive, be watchable, build some pieces, build pieces to the puzzle. You know, I don't expect the Jets to make the playoffs this year. And look, if they're playing playoff football, great. If they're also playing, you know, for the playoffs in December, like they're playing meaningful football games in December, I think that's a big thing for the season too as well. That would be a great thing for the season. But it's just about it's just about building a culture, building identity, building a foundation. That's what it's about for Aaron Glenn and the Jets this season. So we'll go to my four keys for the Jets this year, just like we did for my four keys with the Ravens. Key number one: run the football. Or as Rex Ryan would say, ground and pound. But what have the Jets look? What have the Jets always been good at? What have the Jets been good at for almost their entire history? Running the football. When they have been good, what have they done well? Run the football. So from Matt Snell to Curtis Martin to Thomas Jones, Sean Green, to Daniel Thompson, etc. When at Chris Ivory, when have they been good? It's when they run the football. Run the football. You got Justin Fields, who can run the football. Who's very good with his legs. You got Brees Hall. You got Braylon Allen, who they like a lot. Run the football. If you run the football, play ball control offense, control the clock, keep the game at a good score, let your defense play, and you'll win. You'll win some games. But that's where your identity starts. Now, it took a hit today with Elijah Vera Tucker's injury, but that shouldn't still stop you from running the football. Run the football. That should be the Jets' identity on offense for the rest of the season, for the whole season. Number two, well, we go to the offensive line. On that note, the offensive line. Again, Elijah Vera Tucker looks like he's out for the rest of the season, and the rest of the depth chart goes as follows. Left tackle, Olu Fashanu. Right tackle, Ahmad Membu. Joe Tippmann, the center. Left guard, John Simpson. And Xavier Newman looks like he will step in at guard for the New York Jets in the absence of Elijah Vera Tucker. He's entering his third season in the National Football League. So again, it's a tough ask, obviously, for Xavier Newman taking over for Elijah Vera Tucker. But the Jets are going to have to. Aaron Glenn is a guy who's going to ask his players, "Hey, man, we need you to step up." So, and a lot of the season falls on this Jets offensive line and protecting the running game and so on and so forth. Joe Tippmann, I could see Joe Tippmann. They could slot Josh Myers in center, put Joe Tippmann in at guard. I could see that. So it'll be interesting to see. But Tippmann's best position is center. So we'll see if the Jets maybe switch that up. But Joe Tippmann's best position is center. But The Jets are, but Aaron Glenn's going to ask is going to ask Newman, hey man, got to step up. We have an injury, yeah, but we got to play. We got to play football. So that's just Aaron Glenn. It's just who he is. So, but this Jets offensive line, even without AVT, you got Fashanu and Membu lining up at the tackles. You got John Simpson. You got Tippmann. There's still some pretty good players, and you like your two rookie tackles if they can have good, or excuse me, Fashanu's entering his second year and Membu his rookie year. You like the fact that these guys are pairing together. Maybe they could be your tackles for some years for at least the next, five or so, several, 6, 7, 8 years, 9, 10 years, right? If they develop. And then you have Simpson, you have Tippmann. So this is still even without ABT, this is still even without Elijah Vera Tucker, this is still an offensive line that should be at least pretty solid, you know. But that line is going to be the key. If they want to run the football, they got to block. And the Jets haven't had a good offensive line since 2011. So you need a good offensive line. Offensive line for the Jets has to be good, protecting the football or protecting the running game and also protecting Justin Fields. Um, Next one, tackling, tackling. The New York Jets for a while have been one of the worst tackling defenses in the National Football League, and that is with, mind you, two defensive coaches, Todd Bowles and then Robert Saleh, and actually three, Jeff Ulbrich. Three defensive coaches. An interim, Ulbrich was an interim, but still three defensive head coaches. Three. And they have been really bad at tackling. Really bad at tackling. You need this. It's so basic. It's so basic football fundamentals. Tackle. This Jets team, I want to see the Jets defense tackle better. Wrap and tackle. That's all I ask from the Jets defense. Wrap and tackle. And I think Aaron Glenn is as I think Aaron Glenn has probably told the Jets that and has been coaching the Jets up all camp and into the season to wrap into a tackle. Because again, Aaron Glenn's not going to be happy with lack of tackling. He's probably taught these guys from minicamp OTAs to now that you gotta tackle. So for the Jets defense, tackle. Uh, and number four, penalties. Look, this has been a team that has been one of the worst in football in penalties. And they have lost a lot of games over the years, over these last 14 years. A lot of games over these last 14 years because they've made stupid mistakes with penalties. That's on offense and that's on defense and that's on special teams. It's been everywhere. And Aaron Glenn, again, go back to Aaron Glenn, has already showed that he's not going to take these penalties, man. He's already shown it in both training camp and then the preseason. Got to limit. You're always going to have penalties, but you've got to limit them. Got to be a more disciplined football team. Got to be. Be more disciplined. More disciplined. The Jets have to be disciplined. So those are my four keys for the Jets in the 2025 season. Now, on to the schedule. Jets have an interesting schedule. Some games where, they're probably not going to win, but also some games where I think they could win. Starting with week one. We'll preview the game on Friday, but I think, certainly the Steelers, not a game. I think they could maybe win that one. But then they follow up, but we'll talk more about that on Friday. Then they followed up with the Bills at home. Then they're at Tampa Bay, at Miami on Monday Night Football, home against the Cowboys, home against the Broncos, home against the Panthers, at the Bengals, home against the Browns, at the Patriots, at the Ravens, home against the Falcons, home against the Dolphins, at the Jaguars, at the Saints, home against the Patriots, and at the Bills on the in week 18. So again, there's some games that I think the Jets could win. There's some games where I think they're going to get, they'll probably lose, but there's some games in there where I think they could win. I look at some of these games. I think the Jets could sweep the Dolphins. I don't think they'll beat the Bills in any of those two games. Obviously, if Buffalo has something to play for in the final week of the season, but I think the Jets can sweep Miami. I think the Jets could take one could beat the Patriots, in one of those two games. I think the Jets could, if the Jets have a 3-3 record in division, I think that'd be a success right there. People expect the Patriots to be better, so and the Patriots did beat them last year, so but I think the Jets could beat the Patriots in one of those two games. I think the Jets could sweep the Dolphins, you know. And then I look at the rest of the games. Look, they could beat Jacksonville. They could beat the Saints, you know. Um, they could beat Atlanta. Of course, Cleveland and the Panthers. Certainly Dallas. I think they could beat Dallas too. The Jets have some games where I look at and go, they could win those. Could they lose some of those? Of course they could, but they could win those games. I think the Jets again have a good enough defense and can build, and if they could build an identity on offense to compete in some games this year. And again, with coaching, I think Aaron Glenn, again, he hasn't coached a game this year, and I feel like I don't want to keep hyping him up as, I don't know, the next great head coach, but just there is a bit of a difference compared to him and Robert Saleh, compared to him and Adam Gase and pre-Tampa Bay Buccaneers Todd Bowles. I like Todd Bowles. I do. I like Todd Bowles. Um, Compared to him and Jeff Ulbrich. There is a difference. And this maybe is because of the fact that he was a Jet and he was drafted by the Jets, and he had success with the Jets, but I also just think him as a person, him as a coach, I think he's going to keep the Jets in being competitive. I think he's going to give the Jets or start building that identity to give the Jets a chance to win some of these games this year. Which leads me to my prediction for the Jets this season. I think they're going to go 7. I think they're going to go 7-10. If they're lucky, 8-9. I think this is a team that can win 7 or 8 games this year. And I don't think they'll make the playoffs. So yes, that'll be 15 consecutive years of no playoffs, but at least they will have some, I think, hopefully, building some pieces here, showing that they could be a decent team in the next year or 2 or 3 or so. You know, showing that they're making steps, making progress. You know, and that's I think what the Jets have to do this season: make progress. You know, look, I don't think that. Look, obviously, there's a lot of Jet fans that want to see this team in the playoffs, but I think there's also a lot of Jet fans that just want to see you be, competitive and look forward to watching you every Sunday. It goes back to Aaron Glenn. Just yesterday, I think. Just yesterday, Aaron Glenn was asked by the press, what would define a successful season for you? Interesting question to ask to Aaron Glenn. And he goes, I want to be a team where the fans will look up and say, we're proud of that team. If they say that, I'll be happy because within that, I know wins will come. And look, I like that answer. Look, you can't say, oh, I expect to go to the playoffs because then people will go, whoa, playoffs, Jets, whoa. Who are you to say playoffs? You haven't made the playoffs in 14 straight years. Your team, what are you talking about? I think he gave a good answer here. And I think he's right. What's a successful season for the 2025 Jets? Be a competitive football team that makes the fans want to watch you and say, yeah, I look forward to watching you guys. I want to see, but it's about progress and building a competitive team that could maybe make the playoffs, maybe in 26, 27-ish, right? Build the pieces. Look, Dan Campbell, again, I said it before with Aaron Glenn. He was there with Dan Campbell when Dan Campbell built the Lions and the team they are now. 2021, a rebuild transition process year. 2022, but they did show some competitiveness and they took a few steps. Then 2022, they took some big steps, right? And then 2023, they made the playoffs and got to the NFC Championship game. And the last year, they had one of the best records in all of the NFL, and they made the playoffs again. Before the Red Hot Commanders, before they ran into the Red Hot Commanders. They ran into a Hot Commanders team in the playoffs. But he saw what Dan Campbell did and how he was able to implement that for the Lions to become a really good football team. I think he's going to try to implement the same thing with the Jets, and it's going to take a couple of years. And those playoff consecutives, the streak will continue to 15, maybe even to 16. But if he can take the next couple of years and build them into a playoff team, and for Aaron Glenn, hopefully to be the head coach for the next, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, something the Jets haven't had since, I mean, Rex was the head coach for 6 years. That was the longest they've had over the past 25 or so years, right? Because Parcells was 3 years, Algro was 1 year, Herm Edwards was 5 years, Mangini was 3 years. Mangini was three, Rex was of course 6 years from 2009 to 2014. Um, and then Todd Bowles was what, 4 years from 2015 to 2018, so 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. Gase was 2 years. Sala was 3.5, I think, right? 2021 to 2024. So 3 years and 4 games before he got fired. And then Jeff Holbrook was the interim coach for the rest of the season. Hopefully Aaron Glenn, hopefully Aaron Glenn is that coach for 9, 10, or 11 years or so for the Jets. Been long, so but it starts with, you know, building it up this year and making progress and being at least a competitive football team, a team that can make you at least be watchable. So, and a team that you go out there every week and say, "Hey, we're gonna play hard. You know, we're gonna play hard, and we're gonna keep playing, and we're gonna try to win games." You know, so, and I think the Jets can do that because again, they got a decent enough roster where I think they can win 7 or 8 or so games. You know, I think they do. You got Justin Fields, who I'm excited to see this year. You got Hall and Allen. You got Garrett Wilson. You got Mason Taylor and Jeremy Ruckert. You got some guys on the offensive line, even without AVT. You got Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson back. You got Quentin Williams, of course. You've got Quincy Williams. Sauce Gardner, I think, is going to have a really good season. So there's pieces there to be, they got Nick Folk back. So there's some pieces there, especially with Gardner and Wilson after contract extensions. I think those two guys are going to have really good years, especially Sauce Gardner. Um, I think there's some pieces here to like with this team that could give you some, hope for the future. And I think Aaron Glenn is a head coach that can give you hope for the future. So if they can if they can make progress this season and start building identity, then they can carry that over into the offseason and make some improvements there and then improve on this season into 2026. So this will be the Jets are a very interesting, fascinating team to watch. I think they could be competitive. I think they can maybe win some games that people wouldn't expect them to win, you know. And I may be one of the few that thinks that about this team because there's a lot of people I'm sure that see this team and go, 13, 14, 15 losses, But I think they can, I think they could be a bit better than what many think. And I think with Aaron Glenn, again, culture, build your foundation, build your identity, build the team, build the blocks, make progress this season. You know, that's what it's all about for the Jets. Progress. Make progress, 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 and progress. And you do, and I think, so should be an interesting watch. Should be an interesting season for the Jets this year. Should be, so we'll see how it goes. But I think the Jets will be 7-win football team, maybe even 8-win football team. So that's where I think the Jets will be for the 2025 season. Should be, again, we'll see how it should be interesting. But so that's my previews for the Ravens and the Jets. Certainly a tale of two teams. One team that's trying to win the Super Bowl with all the expectations to win the Super Bowl, all the expectations and pressures on them. And then you got the other team that is got no pressure on them. No one thinks they're going to do much at all. But there's certainly some things you look at with this team, go, maybe they could do, maybe they could win some games this year. There's some pieces, and you like new head coach, new GM, right? New quarterback, et cetera. So, not many people expect them to do much, but but I think you can look at them and go, they can win some games this year. Maybe they can surprise some people and be at least a competitive team this year. So two different teams with two different expectations and two different paths that they're going. One's trying to get to the mountaintop and become champions, while the other one's starting that climb, or hopefully starting that climb up the mountain. So we'll see. So that'll do it for this edition of Mazon Ravens and Mazon Jets. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you guys so much for watching. Tomorrow, we'll be back for more Mazon Mets to recap their series with the Marlins and their series with the Tigers. Cool. The story of the 2025 New York Mets. We'll be back for tomorrow with Mazon Mets. And on Friday, we will do Mazon Ravens, Mazon Jets, previewing their week one games. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Have yourselves a great day. Happy NFL season.